5 a.m. on February 24, 1955, driver Arthur Thompson stood in the cab of steam locomotive number 78,018 at Bleath Gill, 1,370 feet above sea level, the highest point on any railway line in England. Standard procedure said wait for daylight, wait for the storm to pass, wait for help. Thompson had 8 wagons of limestone behind him. Each weighed 20 tons. The wind was hitting 40 miles per hour. The temperature was 12 degrees below zero, and he was already stuck. In the next 5 days, railway workmen would dig through 30-foot drifts, set fire to their own locomotive to free it from ice, and battle conditions that would close every road in County Durham. This is the story of how Britain's highest railway became a frozen trap, and how the men of the northeastern region refused to abandon their engine. The Stainmore Line was never supposed to be easy. Built in 1861, it ran from Darlington to Tebay across the Pennine watershed. At Stainmore Summit, the track crossed moorland so exposed that snow fences stood along both sides for 3 miles. In winter, the fences collected drifts. In bad winters, the drifts buried the fences. In terrible winters, the drifts buried the trains. February 1955 was a terrible winter. The cold had started in late January. By mid-February, every weather station in northern England was reporting temperatures in the single digits. The Met Office noted persistent Arctic airflow. The Railway Operating Department noted something simpler. Everything was freezing. On February 23rd, Thompson received his orders at Darlington Shed. Take the limestone train to Kirkby Stephen. The load consisted of 8 wagons, each carrying 20 tons of crushed stone from the quarries near Barnard Castle. Standard freight. Routine run. He signed for locomotive number 78,018, a standard Class II mixed-traffic engine, built in 1952, 3 cylinders, 49,000 pounds of tractive effort, good on grades, reliable in weather. Thompson had driven the Stainmore Line for 14 years. He knew every curve, every gradient, every wind trap. He also knew the forecast. Snow was coming, heavy snow, but control said the line was open, the train was ready, and freight didn't stop for weather forecasts. He departed Darlington at 9 p.m. The first 40 miles went normally. Barnard Castle, Winston, Bowes. The locomotive climbed steadily through the Teesdale valleys, steam pressure holding at 225 pounds per square inch. Thompson kept the fire bright and the injectors running. Cold weather meant heat loss. Heat loss meant condensation. Condensation meant frozen valves. At Barras, 12 miles from the summit, the snow started. Not the light scatter that passes for snow in the lowlands. This was Pennine snow, horizontal, dense, driven by wind that had crossed 3,000 feet of moorland without hitting anything taller than a sheep. Visibility dropped to 20 yards, then 10, then the length of the locomotive. Thompson reduced speed to 15 miles per hour. The gradient steepened to 1 in 59. The engine laboured. 78,018 was hauling 160 tons up a mountain in a blizzard, and every wheel mattered. At Stainmore Summit at 4:45 a.m. on February 24th, the wheels stopped mattering. The locomotive hit a drift and stopped. Not a slow stop, not a wheel spin and recovery stop, a complete, immediate, buried to the boiler stop. Thompson opened the regulator. The wheels spun. He closed it, let the engine settle, tried again. The wheels spun faster. The train didn't move. He climbed down from the cab. The drift was 30 feet deep and 200 yards long. It had formed during the night between the snow fences, filling the cutting like concrete. The locomotive was buried past the running plate. The first 3 wagons were invisible. The wind was still blowing at 40 miles per hour, adding 6 inches of snow every hour. Thompson climbed back into the cab and used the telegraph. The message reached Kirkby Stephen at 5:15 a.m. From there it went to Darlington Control. By 6 a.m. the northeastern region knew it had a problem. 1 locomotive, 8 loaded wagons, and 2 crew members were stuck at the most exposed point on the entire system, in conditions that were getting worse. The regional operating superintendent made 2 decisions immediately. First, send the rescue gang. The permanent way teams from Darlington, West Auckland and Barnard Castle were mobilised. 53 men, 24 shovels, 6 braziers, 4 snowplows. They would dig out the locomotive and clear the line. Second, keep the boiler hot. A cold boiler meant a dead engine. A dead engine meant abandonment. The northeastern region did not abandon locomotives. Thompson and his fireman, Jack Morris, would stay with 78,018 until it moved. The rescue gang reached Barras by midday. They couldn't go further. The road from Bowes to Stainmore was blocked. The farmer's track from Barras to the summit was blocked. The railway line itself was blocked by the same drift that had stopped Thompson. The gang would have to dig through 2 miles of snow to reach the locomotive. They started digging at 1 p.m. Ganger William Henderson led the Darlington team. 22 men with shovels working in shifts of 30 minutes, because longer than that, and frostbite became probable. The method was simple. Dig a trench alongside the track, wide enough for men to pass, deep enough to reach ballast, throw the snow upward, move forward, repeat. In 6 hours they advanced 400 yards. Henderson sent a telegram to control at 7 p.m. Progress slow, weather worsening, request mechanized equipment. The mechanized equipment didn't exist. The northeastern region had 2 rotary snowplows, both deployed in Scotland. The roadrail excavator at Darlington couldn't operate in 40-mile-per-hour winds. The helicopter at RAF Topcliffe was grounded. The rescue would be manual. That night the temperature dropped to 18 below zero. At the summit, Thompson and Morris kept the fire burning. The coal bunker held 4 tons. At normal steaming rate that meant 12 hours. But this wasn't normal steaming. They were burning coal just to prevent the boiler from freezing, running the engine at minimum pressure with the blower wide open to maintain draft. They estimated 18 hours of fuel remaining. The wind had shifted. Instead of blowing along the cutting, it was blowing across it, creating a Venturi effect that accelerated wind speed to 60 miles per hour. Snow was penetrating every gap in the cab. The water in the tender gauge was freezing. Morris had to crack the ice every 30 minutes to check the level. The ice was the problem, not just in the tender, everywhere. The motion, the rods, cranks and valve gear that converted steam pressure into wheel rotation was exposed to the storm. Condensation from the cylinders was freezing on contact. By midnight on February 24th, the entire mechanism was encased in ice half an inch thick. Thompson tried to move the locomotive at 2 a.m. The wheels wouldn't turn. The ice had locked everything solid. He reported to control at 3 a.m. Motion frozen, engine immobile even if drift cleared, require thawing equipment. Thawing equipment meant fire. At 8 a.m. on February 25th, Henderson's gang reached a point 1 mile from the summit. They could see the locomotive's chimney above the snow. They could not reach it. The drift between their position and 78,018 was 40 feet deep and packed solid by wind. Digging through it would take 2 days. They didn't have 2 days. Thompson's coal was running out. Henderson made a decision. They would dig an approach trench to the locomotive, then use paraffin and rags to thaw the motion manually. It was dangerous. Open flame near a steam engine violated every safety regulation, but a frozen engine was already a safety violation. The thawing team reached the locomotive at 4 p.m. 6 men carrying 12 gallons of paraffin in jerry cans plus cotton waste from the Darlington stores. The plan was straightforward. Soak the rags in paraffin, drape them over the frozen motion, ignite them, and keep the metal warm until the ice melted. Ganger Robert Hutchinson supervised. He had worked the Stainmore Line for 28 years. He knew steam locomotives. He also knew what paraffin fire could do to lubricating oil, paint, and human skin. The work would be slow and precise. They started with the valve gear on the right side, cotton waste soaked in paraffin, wrapped around the expansion link, a match, flame. The ice began to melt immediately, running down the rods in streams that refroze on the ground. The men worked in pairs, one holding the burning rag with pliers, one scraping the softened ice with a knife. They cleared the expansion link in 40 minutes, then the combination lever, then the eccentric rod, then the crosshead. Every component had to be thawed individually. If they rushed, the ice would crack the metal. If they delayed, the metal would refreeze. The work continued through the night. By dawn on February 26th, the motion on both sides was clear. Thompson opened the regulator carefully. The wheels moved, 6 inches, then a foot. Then they stopped. The drift was still there, but the locomotive was no longer frozen inside it. Henderson's gang resumed digging. They had been working for 68 hours with 4 hours of sleep. The medical officer from Darlington had visited twice, treating 12 cases of frostbite and 3 of exhaustion. The temperature was still below zero, the wind was still blowing, but the drift was finally shrinking. At 2 p.m. on February the 27th, 78,018 moved under its own power, not far, 30 yards to the edge of the cleared section. But it moved. Thompson kept the pressure low and the regulator barely open, coaxing the locomotive forward inch by inch. The 8 wagons followed, dragging through snow that reached the axles. By 6 p.m, the train was clear of the drift. By midnight, it was at Kirkby Stephen. At 3 a.m. on February 28th, Thompson and Morris signed off duty at T-Bay. They had been on the locomotive for 122 hours. The journey that should have taken 6 hours had taken 5 days. The Northeastern region conducted an inquiry in March. The findings were technical: inadequate snow fencing, insufficient weather monitoring, poor communication between forecast services and operating departments. The recommendations were practical: extend the fences at Stainmore Summit, install wind gauges at exposed locations, establish protocols for suspending freight operations during Arctic conditions. None of it mentioned the paraffin fires. That detail appeared elsewhere. British Transport Film sent a crew to Darlington in April. They interviewed Henderson, Hutchinson and Thompson. They filmed reconstructions of the dig, the thawing operation and the final extraction. The result was a 28-minute documentary titled Snowbound at Stainmore, released in October 1955. The film showed everything: the drifts, the wind, the frozen motion, the burning rags. It showed Henderson directing his gang through the blizzard. It showed Hutchinson kneeling beside the locomotive with flaming cotton waste in his hands. It showed Thompson in the cab, face black with coal dust, eyes red from smoke and sleeplessness. What it didn't show was the calculation that Henderson made when he decided to use fire, the calculation that Thompson made when he agreed to stay with the locomotive instead of walking out, the calculation that every man on that summit made, the value of one engine versus the risk of frostbite, exhaustion and burns. They chose the engine, not because regulations required it, not because management ordered it, because in 1955 on the Northeastern region, you didn't abandon your locomotive. You dug it out, you thawed it, you brought it home. The Stainmore Line closed in 1962, not because of snow, because of economics. Diesel locomotives were cheaper, road haulage was faster, the limestone quarries switched to trucks. By January 1962, fewer than 3 freight trains per week used the summit route. British Railways withdrew the service on January 20th. The track was lifted in 1964. The snow fences were removed in 1965. The station at Stainmore Summit became a farmhouse. The cutting, where 78,018 spent 5 days buried in ice, became a hiking trail. But the film remained. Snowbound at Stainmore became required viewing at British Transport Film's training centre. Permanent waygangers watched Henderson's techniques. Locomotive crews watched Thompson's boiler management. Safety officers watched Hutchinson's fire discipline. The documentary that was supposed to showcase dramatic rescue became a textbook on cold weather railway operations. 78,018 was scrapped in 1965. 10 years of service, 342,000 miles, dozens of runs over Stainmore Summit in snow, rain, fog, and ice. None of them as famous as the one where it didn't move for 5 days. Thompson retired in 1968. He gave one interview about the incident to the Railway magazine in 1971. The interviewer asked if he ever regretted staying with the locomotive. Thompson's answer was 3 words. It was mine. Not British Railway's locomotive, not the Northeastern region's equipment. His. The engine he had signed for. The machine he was responsible for. The iron that he had nursed through a blizzard, kept alive with coal and fire and will, and refused to leave until it rolled again. That was the standard they worked to, not written in regulations, not taught in training, learned on the Stainmore Line at 1,370 feet in 40-mile-per-hour winds at 18 below zero, where machines froze solid and men burned them free.